Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Michael Osman. Today we're going to be covering 4K versus 1080. Today's probably not going to be the most professional video I've ever done because I haven't put a video out in about a month and I just haven't had time to do it. So I'm going to try and get through this and just throw it out there. So hopefully I can get all the information that I want to share to you to help you with your videos and make sure you're getting the best footage you can get for your videos. So let's dive in. So I always shoot most of my videos in 4K just because the image quality is just gonna be overall better. If you're watching it on a 1080 screen, the 4K is still going to look better. The 1080 is still gonna look good, and depending on your camera and the setting that you can run the 1080 on, it's still gonna look just fine. But the 4K video is gonna have more detail, it's gonna be a sharper image, so I always use 4K whenever I can. The downside to using 4K is the file sizes are a lot bigger, so when it comes to editing, if your computer isn't fast enough or powerful enough, it can make editing very difficult and become a huge pain sometimes. But if you can shoot 4K out of your camera, and if you can edit with your computer with 4K, I would highly recommend shooting 4K. You get double the amount of pixels in your image. So when you're out doing a hunt or whatever, if you want to scale in, you can scale in up to 200% closer on your subject, and it will still be in 1080p after being scaled in 200%. And that's a huge reason why I shoot 4K, especially when self-filming. Most of my hunts I'm self-filming, and so not having to zoom in on the subject as tight to get that good shot, I can stay back from the subject to make sure I have the animal in the frame, and then I can scale in up to 200% and still have a really clear image, just like it looked like it was shot zoomed in. I can even scale in up to 300% and it still is a good image. But when you have 1080, since you have so many less pixels, you only have 3,000 pixels in a 1080 image, where 4K you have 6,000. So you have so many more pixels to get those details. So when you want to zoom in and scale in 1080, it starts to get blurry as you scale in. So you have to be tighter on your subject. That's why I always shoot 4K when I can. Now I do shoot 1080 on like all my higher frame rates because most cameras, your high frame rates are gonna be 1080 and not 4K. Some of the newer cameras do shoot 4K in those higher frame rates, which is super awesome, but I don't have thousands of dollars to spend on a new camera because my wife would probably shoot me. But maybe at some point I'll be able to get one of those cameras. Also, it would be a lot harder to edit those files unless you have a really fast computer. Trying to edit a 4K 120 frame per second file is gonna be ridiculous unless you have a good computer. It just honestly probably wouldn't work. So I would use the 4K whenever you can. Obviously your higher frame rates, you can still use the 1080. I shoot 1080, 120 frames per second all the time, and it still looks really good because I can still shoot the 120 frames per second at 100 megabytes per second for file size. So it's still a really good quality image, and you're not gonna be able to tell the difference most of the time as long as it's a good camera. Just so you have some examples, I'm gonna show you a clip of me in 4K and a clip of me in 1080 so you can see the difference. And maybe you won't see a big difference, maybe you will. On my camera, when I shoot 24 frames per second in 4K, I can shoot at 100 megabytes. In 1080, I can only shoot at 50 megabytes. So I see a little bit of a difference between the two, and maybe you will, maybe you won't. For me, I like to shoot the 4K because it does look better. So here are those examples. Next example I'm going to show you is what it looks like when you do scale in on a 4K image compared to when you scale in on a 1080 image. So that way you get the idea of why filming in 4K, especially self-filming, can be so much better in 4K than 1080. It gives you so much more of an advantage, especially for the self-filmer. So check out these examples. So this is what the 4K looks like when it's at regular 100% scale. This is what the 4K looks like when it's scaled in 200%. So it's now at 1080. And this is what the 4K looks like scaled into 300%. This is what 1080 looks like at 100% scale. This is what 1080 looks at 200% scale. And this is what 1080 looks like at 300% scaled in. Obviously, you can see the difference between the 4K versus the 1080, especially when you're scaling in on it. 1080 looks good at 100%. When you want to scale in farther, if you're self-filming and the editing, then obviously you can see the 1080 starts to get blurry. That's one big advantage for 4K, and that's why I always shoot 4K when I'm filming my hunts, especially when I am self-filming. Like I mentioned earlier, one of the disadvantages of 4K is going to be when you come to the editing process. If you don't have a good computer for editing, it's going to be really hard to do the 4K files because they are 3 times the size of the 1080 files. But if you have any sort of decent computer at all, you won't have an issue with the 4K files. And one thing you can do is if you do have issues with it, you can use proxy files when you're editing in your program. So I do that all the time. I used to not, and I have a decent computer, so I was still okay to do the editing, but it was a lot slower. But when you use proxy files, you can edit the files in a lot smaller file size, and then at the end of it, you can just change it and render it all into the high quality. Makes editing so much smoother, so much faster. You no longer will yell and cuss and curse at your computer because you can edit the whole thing so much easier. So if you guys want to see how to do that, let me know, put a comment below, and I will show you how to edit in proxy files and then render it in the high quality. It makes such a huge difference, and you won't need that crazy expensive fast computer to be able to edit those files. So the last thing I want to mention is if you are shooting in 1080p, that's perfectly fine. The best thing you still can do when you go to edit is to edit it in a 4K timeline. What that will do is it will upscale your image. It won't be a true 4K image, but it will upscale it to the 4K. And then when you upload it, so you're gonna export it in 4K, and then when you upload it to YouTube, if that's what you're planning on doing with your video, it will upload it in a higher bit rate, and YouTube will process it at a higher bit rate because it recognizes it as 4K. So it will upload it at that higher bit rate, which will be a higher quality. I used to always just do the 1080, found out that YouTube basically just goes off whatever you uploaded and they just do it at a certain bit rate. So if you do it in 4K, even if you shot it in 1080, as long as you edit it and exported it in 4K and uploaded it in 4K, you will have a higher quality video on YouTube if you do it in 4K. So that's another thing you can do. Even if you are just shooting it in 1080, you'll still get a better quality on YouTube if you upload it in 4K. So that's about all I have for today. Sorry this video wasn't the best cut out, best professional video. Really just wanted to get something out there and get this information out to you guys so you guys can use it when you're filming and when you're editing and when you're uploading, so that way you guys know the best way you can do that, especially for YouTube, and if you just want to have those best great quality videos. So hopefully this helps you guys. I'll try and get some more videos out soon. I think the next video I will have out will be on all the gear I use. I'm gonna show all the gear I use for my hunts, everything I used last year. I've got like a couple new pieces of gear for this next season, and I still have some more I'm planning on getting. Just not sure when I'm gonna get that, but I'm gonna show you exactly how my setup was, and hopefully you'll get some information from that, and hopefully I can help you out in any way. Leave a comment or question below if you have any. I'd be glad to answer them, and see you next time.